One interesting thing, in my history is that when I was a kid, back in the 60s, I used to read everything from J. Allen Hynek, and this guy, I figured, he was an astronomer. My gosh, he was always into this stuff, and he was the Air Force consultant for 20 years, and now he's investigating UFOs on his own. Who knew that one day that I would be working with him and writing a book with the guy? It's almost like, one of these dreams come true.
Ladies and gentlemen, Banal of America Audio, with your host, Tim Banal.
What is going on, my friends? This is Tim Banal of BanalofAmerica.com with another edition of BOAA Audio Season 6. No theme music this week. We'll detail all that at the end of the show because you have been waiting far too long for this installment of BOAA Audio. Not only is our guest one of the most frequently requested names by the BOAA Audio listeners when I poll them for potential future guests on the program, but also I have been particularly captivated by his work as I've gotten to discover more and more of his stuff. And the more I talk to him and the more I look at his material, the more blown away I am by this guy's research. He really is razor sharp, cutting edge, looking at the world of the paranormal and trying to apply science to the paranormal and trying to tie all these seemingly disparate genres together in order to find some kind of answers to the big questions that we all ponder. Of course, I'm talking about legendary ufologist Phil Imbrogno, who finally arrives on BOAA Audio for a nearly 2-hour conversation. In this interview, we're going to cover Phil's lengthy career examining UFOs and high strangeness events, how his philosophy on the paranormal has evolved over the years, and how he sees this enigmatic field today. Along the way, we're going to discuss the Hudson Valley UFO flap, reptilians, channeling, specifically the mind-blowing case of Dean Fagerstrom, the Djinn 2012, and a whole bunch more fringe areas which may hold the key to unlocking many paranormal mysteries. What I particularly like and respect about Phil Imbrogno is that he is willing to examine the outlier cases in ufology and in the paranormal field, and look at a lot of stuff that some of the more mainstream researchers just won't touch because the material is way too far out for them. It's not too far out for Phil Imbrogno. He dives in and really gets his hands around some remarkable material and some seriously mind-blowing information. Altogether, this is truly an episode of BOAA Audio that will have you pondering the very nature of the paranormal as we're going to examine a number of esoteric outliers with Phil Imbrogno, a true maverick of high strangeness research. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Phil Imbrogno, allow me to provide you with a little background on him. Phil Imbrogno has been investigating and researching paranormal phenomena for over 30 years. He has a BA degree in astronomy from the University of Texas, a BS degree in earth science from Northeastern/Boston College, and a master's degree in chemistry from MIT. He's been a science educator for the past 25 years and has authored countless magazine articles on science and the paranormal, and has appeared or done research for a number of major television presentations on UFOs, astronomy, and the paranormal. He's the author of Night Siege, the Hudson Valley UFO Sightings, Files from the Edge, Interdimensional Universe, and his latest book, Ultra-Terrestrial Contact. Unfortunately, Phil does not have a webpage, but you can find out more from him at the website for Llewellyn Books, Llewellyn, or just punch in Phil Imbrogno on Google and you'll find a whole bunch of stuff on him. Phil Imbrogno, Imbrogno. With all that said, let's get down to business, folks, and rock and roll. This interview was recorded on January 18th, 2011. Phil Imbrogno talking about ultra-terrestrial contact and paranormal outliers on BOAA Audio Season 6.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of BOAA Audio Season 6. I'm really looking forward to this week's installment of the program. Our guest, I like to think of him as one of the unsung legends in the world of ufology. He's been looking at the phenomenon for over 30 years, not just ufology, but also high strangeness in general. And he's not out for glory, he's out for answers, and that's what I really respect about him. And he also takes a look at a lot of the outlier cases and the cases that don't seem to fit into the paradigm that the world of UFOs and UFO research seems to have created for the phenomenon. So he's doing some really amazing work and under the radar in a big way. He's been requested numerous times by many of the listeners to BOA Audio, so I'm sure they're going to be very excited to hear him on the program. He's the author of, most notably, Interdimensional Universe and Files from the Edge, as well as Night Siege, which is about the Hudson Valley UFO flap. And his latest book is Ultra-Terrestrial Contact, a paranormal investigator's explorations into the hidden abduction phenomenon. I've had the pleasure of not just working with him at the Exeter UFO Festival, but also spending the day with him in Hudson Valley, checking out the stone chambers. It was just an amazing experience for me and quite an education and a real thrill. So I'm looking forward to sort of continuing that experience here on the program for all you folks. He is, of course, Phil Imbrogno. Phil, welcome to BOA Audio. It's been a long time coming. Hopefully this is the first of many future appearances.
Well, thank you, Tim. It's good to talk to you again. And, yeah, that was some day out there tracking down the chambers.
For sure. I should mention to you, this is sort of a break from script here, but when I went home, I looked into this, and there is a stone chamber right here in my town, but it's much different from the ones we saw. I'll have to take some pictures and send it to you. It's very
I'd like
small.
To see it.
Yeah, it's very small. It's only about 3 feet high. It was a very interesting sort of little place to discover. Now, as I said, you've been doing this for like 30 years, and I'm a little concerned about asking for the bio background, but let's do it. Let's talk a little bit about, how you got into looking at high strangeness and UFOs and, how your career sort of evolved. And as I said, this is probably the first of many installments of conversation between you and I, because I definitely want to dig into the historical aspect of UFO studies sometime in the future with you, because that's sort of my forte. That's sort of my wheelhouse. But let's talk a little bit, about your career, how you got started in all this, what sparked your interest, and where it all led.
Yeah, well, it's been a good number of years there, and I look back at it, it's hard to believe that all of those decades have passed. But, my interest began in the 60s. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were so many UFO magazines out then. This is when, you would see it on UFO shows on TV all the time, and, I mean, they were all over.
Yeah.
And, that fascinated me. So I would, turn on the TV, and I would see people like, Dr. J. Allen Hynek on TV talking about UFOs and so on. And then, I went into the military, and when I got out, I still had a great interest in the UFO phenomena. And, when I got out while I was in the military and after I got out, I went to school for astronomy, my first degree down in Texas. And I was, still fascinated. I did a lot of investigation, while I was in the military and while I was a student in school. And, I'm interested in astronomy, really. Mm-hmm. And, the idea that UFOs represent extraterrestrial spacecraft would fascinate anybody. And so I decided to really start investigating UFOs in detail back about 1975. And my first, like everybody else back then, was always an open field.
Yeah.
And it was like just on the fringe of when, the United States government stopped investigating UFOs not too many years after that. Mm-hmm. So, really nobody knew how to investigate the phenomena. We would see various books and read various books that were out there by Frank Edwards and Donald Keyhole and so on. And, we would pick up these investigation techniques that, almost copied like what the government might do back then during Project Blue Book, even though they didn't investigate very many cases. And, my idea at that time was that, UFOs were probably extraterrestrial and they were nuts and bolts spaceships and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And cases came into my direction, and I was kind of dismayed by it. I thought that the cases were, the information was vague, and It could have been misinterpretation of just about anything. And I started becoming somewhat of a skeptic and saying, this is what people are seeing. Probably everything that was in the papers and everything else I've read is probably over-exaggerated.
Yeah.
I realized that, I was just touching the tip of the iceberg. And as I became more well-known, having, certain articles done on my work and so on and so on, more cases came to my attention, and I began to realize this was a very complex phenomena. And, of course, my big introduction into big-time UFO investigation began with the Hudson Valley case.
Yeah.
But one interesting thing, in my history is that when I was a kid, back in the 60s,
mm-hmm.
I used to, read everything from J. Allen Hynek, and this guy, I figured, he was an astronomer. My gosh, he was always into this stuff, and he was the Air Force consultant for 20 years, and now he's investigating UFOs on his own. Who knew that one day that I would be working with him and writing a book with the guy? It's almost like, one of these dreams come true.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's basically it. The big-time introduction into UFOs began with the Hudson Valley case.
When did you, shift from, it sounds like you sort of got into it and you sort of had the pragmatic approach, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, that it's nuts and bolts. And I've heard in the past that, they didn't even touch the alien contact part of it, especially when you first started getting into this. When did you sort of shift to more, open-mindedness towards the paranormal end of it, if you will? That hopefully that makes sense. It's sort of a vague, big terms there, but I think you know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. Back in the 70s, we were more interested in collecting reports that sounded like alien encounters, and aliens are here for scientific exploration, and picking up little flowers and plants and examining people and so on, and their spaceships from fantastic spaceships from another star system, and so on and so on. But there was something else that was attached to the phenomena itself, a bizarre aspect of it that did not indicate aliens, but indicated something else, which today we call the paranormal. And when these cases came to my attention, I really didn't know how to handle them. People claiming contact experience, claiming to be abducted by aliens, and so on and so on. And I did investigate some of them, but, went away scratching my head saying, how does this apply to the UFO phenomena? It has nothing to do with aliens, yet this whole experience that these people were having started with a UFO encounter and just grew into something else that's, bizarre.
Yeah.
So, but, then the Hudson Valley case took place. And once again, people were reporting what they thought was a solid object. And, but then again, there were also cases of high strangeness that popped up that were outside of the normal realm of a UFO sighting, if you can consider UFO sightings normal.
Yeah.
So, these cases popped up. But during the investigation, as you know, that J. Allen Hynek, Alan and I did quite a bit of field work on these cases. And he would not touch all of the contact cases and all of the abduction cases that were coming to us. And he said to me, UFOs are hard enough to believe. We have to make this respectable. You cannot give the media these cases. They'll have a field day with it. And it would, end up making the whole thing look ridiculous. And I argued with him on a number of occasions saying, it's part of the phenomena, whether it's psychological, whether it's just a fantasy or a psychosis or something, or if it's real, it's part of the UFO experience. And, of course, he would just look at me and, puff on his pipe and say, we are not investigating those cases.
Wow. Wow.
But as time went on, I began to realize this was all part of the UFO experience. And the UFO phenomena is part of the paranormal world. Many UFO investigators will probably deny this and think that, UFOs are aliens. It's scientific. No, it's all part of the paranormal world. There's no science in the investigation of UFOs.
Yeah, because we can't even wrap our minds around it. We can't even wrap our science around it. So how we,
right?
It's using the wrong instruments.
Science is based on the scientific method. The scientific method was devised from observing physical events, using physical instruments and our senses. You cannot document something that is so fleeting, that is phantasm in nature, like the UFO phenomena. So the scientific method breaks down considerably. And I say all the time to UFO investigators, and they just walk away saying, Pete, we have to develop a new mode of investigation, a new rules for investigating UFOs. You can't walk away and say we can't accept this. It's not scientific. There's no science in the investigation of UFOs.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with you. And like I said in the introduction, what I really respect about your work, especially this book, is that you really, you're willing to look at the outlier cases quite a bit. And this book is chock full of outlier cases. And that may be where we need to go to get more information, because clearly, the standard UFO sighting and the standard abduction stories just aren't cutting it as far as, learning more about what's really going on.
That is true. That is true. And this is why for so many years, people involved with UFO research have just been going around in circles. Mm-hmm. And they've just been, they just really, many of them, get into these sidelines with, paranoia and stuff like that. And this is why, we really haven't accomplished anything in the field for the past 30 years. I mean, it's because no one really wants to look at it for what it really is. And the paranormal, everything in the paranormal is the same way. People who are investigating ghost sightings, the whole phenomena is ghost. People who are investigating like demonology, everything is, these entities, these demons. People investigating UFOs are saying, they're aliens from another world. You just can't look at this phenomena and say, put one label on it. The paranormal, including UFOs, is a very, very complex thing that probably has very, very many different types of origins.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And the title of the book, Ultra-Terrestrial Contact, that sort of sets the stage in a way for your theory, I guess you could say, or the way you see it now, which is that, we're not dealing with a straight-up extraterrestrial thing. It may be part of it, but we're also dealing with something that's interdimensional in nature and has different laws of reality than what we're dealing with.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying that the entire what we call the UFO phenomena, the UFO experience, is in fact, interdimensional or from another dimension or another reality or so on. Some of it may be extraterrestrial. I believe there are, many different explanations for many different cases. So anyone investigating UFOs really should be very well versed in the entire paranormal spectrum, mm-hmm. because when you're dealing with UFOs, every aspect of the paranormal is going to eventually show up.
Yeah, and I've talked to, my friend Greg Bishop says this all the time, that, when investigating a UFO case, it seems like the investigators miss out on a lot of information by not really asking the experiencer or the witness, how they felt and what became of them during the event, after the event, what was the change that went on in them. That might be another area that, there could be considerable amount of information that we just haven't really cultivated yet.
This is true. People who have a true paranormal experience, a true encounter with a UFO, in many cases, it totally changes their life. And you see people who continue to have experiences, they try to interpret the event to make them comfortable. Human beings do not like something unknown happening in their life. They like to feel that their lives are very secure. So when they have a paranormal event, they try to interpret it so that they can deal with it psychologically in their life and become part of their life.
Yeah.
UFO experiences, paranormal experiences, are usually interpreted according to the witness's upbringing, philosophical beliefs, religious beliefs, education, and just whatever part of culture they are in the world. So, because the UFO phenomena and a paranormal event doesn't expose itself to you. The people are left trying to fill in the gaps and interpret as to what's happening to them.
Mm-hmm.
So when people say, okay, there's a paranormal event taking place, let's get the scientists out there.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine and dandy, but you need more than just the scientist out there. It's a multidisciplinary sort of thing, an investigation of paranormal. So you need teams of people from trained in many different disciplines to go out there and look at it, because it is that complex. The physical scientist falls very, very short when it comes to the investigations of the paranormal.
Yeah, this is a very fleeting phenomenon. It certainly barely ever leaves anything beside maybe some trace cases behind. So,
and of course, the psychological effects on the person.
Exactly. Yeah.
And also, the psychological effects on the person and how it changed their life and so on and so on. In my investigations over the year, I've talked to people who have their lives totally changed. I mean, going from, Mr. Everyday Life, going to work 9 to 5, beach in the summertime with the kids and everything, to have this life, this pattern, totally changed. Not like they're trying to escape. It's that a paranormal event took place that totally changed this entire style of life. And for the most part, many people cannot handle it. But then again, some do in their own way to try to deal with it so they can continue on with their life.
Yeah, and I've also noticed sort of, too, that, I haven't had any specific experiences myself, but the more you look into this sort of thing, it does change your perspective on the world in a way where, it's like almost a Copernicus type thing. You realize that you're not really the center of the universe anymore. The human race isn't even the center of the universe. So we're dealing with, we're a speck of sand on a massive beach probably.
And that's true. And when people begin to realize this, that there's something else out there that they are not in control of, it really, really freaks some people out.
Yeah.
Human beings do not like the unknown predator waiting in the dark for them.
Yeah.
And this is part of the paranormal, because in many cases it's the person's own fears that triggers, a lot of these psychological disorders and imbalances that occur with many people.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in the book, you mentioned the shift from flying saucers to black triangles and how you think that indicates an entirely different intelligence. So I guess talk a little bit about that and how you came to that sort of conclusion, because I found that pretty interesting. Because in a way, this study of UFOs really is almost entirely reaction-based. We always have to sort of be catching up to what we're given. This is a very interesting perspective here, because we're seeing a change, and we're trying to come to some kind of conclusion about what that actually means.
Oh, yeah, flying saucers are, old-fashioned, and the shape is gone. I mean, people still see discs, but these triangulars are taking place more. And what people have to remember is that, the first UFOs that were seen were not triangular. 1947, the modern era of UFOs, as you well know, Kenneth Arnold did not see discs. He said he saw like boomerang-shaped objects.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he called them, when somebody asked him, what did they look like? They looked like saucers skipping across water. I mean, flying saucers. Oh, boy, what a name for the press. But it's interesting to note that as soon as those headlines hit, flying saucers, people imagined in their mind what a flying saucer must look like. It's a disc. Yet, people went out there and started seeing discs now. And people were seeing these flying saucers all over the place, these discs. And even the movies at the time, in the 50s going into the 60s, used people's descriptions to model the alien ships in the movies, all the way up to the 60s. And we see these flying saucer encounters, and many of them are classic with the discs and so on. But all in all, the sightings almost seem benign and fun to read about. Then all of a sudden, we see more and more of these dark triangles appearing, and UFOs seem to get more aggressive, going around military bases, having encounters with people having terrifying encounters instead of wondrous encounters like they did in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
So the encounters that people have changed when the dark triangles appear to something that was wondrous, that was reported to be wondrous, to something that ended up terrifying.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and you see many of the reports is that these UFOs become more aggressive. Obviously, there's an intelligence behind behind this, and it seems to have become more aggressive. To me, that indicates, a whole different aspect of the UFO phenomena, something else, another intelligence.
Well, it's interesting, too, because, we've looked back on previous, to extrapolate a little bit, stories, like folk tales and stuff like that, and how, we may be dealing with this phenomenon of UFOs, maybe it's gone on for the history of humankind. It just keeps changing its perception to what we expect it to be, sort of like the airships of the 1800s. And then it makes you wonder what is it, why is it changing to black triangles? Why, what does it all mean, I guess you could say. In a great way, the book here really, it left me with a lot more questions than that I had going into it, which I really like a lot, because it left me with a lot of food for thought having read it. But it makes you wonder, if the phenomenon is changing to our perceptions, then why would we perceive them, to be this way? I don't know.
It's the age of paranoia. So this is what happened. You can see the mentality in the 50s is quite different than the mentality of today.
Yeah.
People were looking for, let's say, saviors from space, so they had to be kind people because the Cold War was on and everything. And even though the Cold War was on, there was still, a different psyche in the United States, especially North America, during the 50s. And then as the 60s and the 70s and the 80s evolved, and now we're in the 21st century, the way people think and they view things has changed considerably. Now, one of the things that, I think the media reflects the psyche of the population, because if you look at some of the movies that, have appeared in the past, in the 80s, going into the 90s, about UFOs and aliens, they're mostly like the aliens are, for the most part, harmless and so on, and explorers. And now all of these movies coming out show these horrible invaders, that are here to eat us and kill us and, and do everything like that. So this is a reflection of the UFO phenomena. So when people go and see these movies now, when they see UFOs, they get a terrifying effect. It seems as if the phenomena itself manifests according to how we want to see it. It almost seems like it adapts to the human race to make its biggest impact on the psychological makeup of the population of that generation at the time.
Yeah. You'd think, given the sad state of affairs in the world today, that maybe we'd see a return to the savior-esque ETs or something along those lines, given how lousy things are right now in the world. But I guess that's a wait-and-see sort of observation.
Well, people are so afraid in the world today with everything going on with viruses
they wouldn't even trust the savior.
Terrorism and war, that, I don't think, they're looking for saviors anymore. They're waiting for the big stone to fall upon their heads.
Yeah, that's true.
And end it all. So, if it's not going to come from space from an asteroid hitting the Earth or the sun going to have eruptions or the tilt of the Earth changing, I mean, we have, in human history, you have never seen all these things of aspects of doom. And now UFOs themselves have become part of that doomsday scenario.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I noticed, too, you mentioned in the book that the emergence of the black triangles seemed to coincide with the emergence of reptilians as sort of a secondary dominant ET species alongside the grays. And you have the chart in the back of the book that based on all the cases that you've looked at and instances of contact with these different types of beings, I was stunned that the reptilians constituted 44%, which was equal to the grays in the chart. It seems like the reptilians are a bit underrepresented in a lot of UFO literature. I know, obviously, they're sort of tied in with the praying mantis type creatures, but still, even then, I always got the impression that they were, a minority, if you will, and it sounds more like they're right up there with the grays as far as what people are reporting.
Yes, they are, especially in the New York area. You have to remember that, I base all that information on my research, and I believe my research is a small cross-section of the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was lucky in the fact that I was in the center of, one of the biggest UFO flaps in history, and that there was just so much information. My gosh, now that, in the 80s, people were very reluctant to report their encounters. But now, people are more willing to talk about it. And I'm getting people are contacting me who had sightings back in the 80s up in the Hudson Valley in New York. So the data is still coming in. And yes, in all of these contact cases where beings have been reported, a big chunk of the percentage up in this area in New England was reptilian in nature. And whenever I get cases now, I get very few cases of the grays. I get cases of these insectoid reptilian type of beings who seem to be, quite nasty.
That's the impression I got from reading the book here. It's very interesting. It's very strange, and not as much of the Nordic creatures or beings that as I had originally thought would be the case, I guess you could say.
They're there in the literature. They're there in the cases that I've investigated, but they seem to be the Nordic type, the tall blondes, the angelic type of beings. They seem to be, much rarer than they have in the past. There's not that many reports, and they seem to be dropping considerably as the years go by.
Makes me wonder why the reptilians are almost underrepresented in the literature, obviously outside of this book. It seems like maybe partially it might be due to the whole David Icke effect in a way, where it's like he sort of, laid claim to the reptilians, and then it went down a very different rabbit hole, and maybe people in the UFO community are afraid to touch reptilians now because of that whole thing. But, I mean, I don't know. That's just speculation on my part.
Well, I think it stems from the fact that, the UFO investigators are like, many of them are like horses with blinders.
Yeah.
On the sides of their face. They only see what they want to see in front of them. And the grays represent, the typical classical alien visitor in UFO literature, but there are a multitude of beings that are also reported in UFO encounters that are not considered. And when some people who are researching UFOs, they encounter something outside of, outside the box, something else way out there, they have a tendency to discount it and say it's a fake case, it's not real.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't fall in the parameters of what I've researched and what I know.
That's disappointing. That's why I give you kudos for daring to take on these outlier cases, because those are the ones that, seem to have the most interesting information in them and break the mold, if you will, on what we've been looking at.
Well, like I said, I believe it's all part of the UFO experience. In order for us to really understand this phenomena, we just can't throw pieces away because they don't fit at the moment. We have to collect all the pieces and then finally put it together to see what the big picture really is. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to solve this at all. You have to be more open-minded. When people become paranormal UFO investigators, they have to go in with an objective mind, not a skeptical mind, but objective. Go into a case not knowing what to expect and accept everything and collect the data and then do a comparison when you have enough information. And also share your information with other people. And and really, you can't let your ego get into this. For example, there are many people who, get involved in a case and they try to support it and they say, yes, this is true, this is true. And they really, let their ego get involved in that, Just let the facts fall where they might. And, whatever the outcome. But it's all a contribution to a study of this phenomena, which it's incredibly complex.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's so hard to wrap your mind around. It's I guess that's what keeps it driving us, too, to get closer and closer to finding more of these pieces to put together the puzzle all together.
Well, there's no, in the world of the paranormal, there's always something to explore. And if people read my books, you'll see how my ideas begin to change and how I'm putting the information together. So for example, in my first book on the paranormal, Night Seeds, the Hudson Valley UFO sightings, that was the beginning of UFO investigations. And then, the books after that, they're not just, random books that are done. They're actually information based on my other research that's basing on my original research, slowly moving forward to try to get answers. So all of my books are like, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5. And they cover a wide range of my explorations into the world of the paranormal and the UFO phenomena, as you well know.
Absolutely. The Stone Chamber stuff alone was, that was not really related to UFOs at all, but quite interesting and could provide a lot of answers to other stuff. So,
well, that came in as a sideline to the UFO phenomena. And the Stone Chambers came to my attention because of my investigations into UFOs in the Hudson Valley. And there was a connection between, the locations of these stone chambers and the appearance of the UFOs and the high strangeness that originated in those areas. For example, when I started plotting all of the information of the UFO sightings on a map, I began to realize that, the Hudson Valley UFO case centered around a number of towns. That's Putnam Valley, Kent Cliffs, and Brewster, New York. And then I took another map and plotted all of those cases of high strangeness, something outside of the ordinary UFO experience. And these high strangeness encounters were not spread all over the place. They were clustered. And, of course, the next thing to do was to go out there and find out what was in that cluster. And every cluster I went to, I found one of these stone chambers. The first time I saw one, I said, wow, what's that? And I did some research on it and read a book by Barry Fell talking about them. And people know about these things. They're a mystery. Then I went to another location and I found another stone chamber in an area that marked in the high strangeness and another one. I says, this has to be more than a coincidence. And going on and doing more research, I found out that historically, strange phenomena has been reported around these stone structures, which are thought to be thousands of years old. And it seems that someone was actually marking locations where, let's say, various unusual events took place which could have been interpreted as religious in nature at one time or manifestation of spirits. Mm-hmm. There was no coincidence, for example, that the center of UFO activity in the Hudson Valley was in these locations in towns that had the highest concentrations of stone chambers. These stone chambers were not placed randomly. They were placed over specific areas. And the Native Americans, by the way, believe that they are on locations that mark doorways to another world.
Yeah. Well, you make the point, too, in the book that it seems like the Native Americans, they may be a little more in tune with what's really going on here, or their cultural history includes information about this stuff, that they know more about this than maybe we're giving them credit for, and we need to look at that stuff a little more carefully.
What we have to do is look at these legends and consider that some of them are based on reality. And even though they're told by people at a different time, and the language they use is different to try to describe something, we just can't discount something as being folklore or just a crazy legend. But many of the Native American legends, the Wapentshire, the Algonquin, and so on, in the Hudson Valley area talk about creatures, beings, lights that come from another world, that emit from particular areas that they called sacred ground at one time. And what they're describing sounds like our UFO encounters of today. I'll give you one quick example, is that there's a place in Putnam called Ninnim Mountain. Mm-hmm. And for Native Americans believe that on top of the mountain there is the spirits from the other world come into our existence, and they are like beautiful glowing colors of lights, and they come out of the clouds to the top of the mountain, and that's how they enter our world. Now, today, people are still seeing those spirits of the mountains, the lights appearing up there, but they're not calling them spirits, they're calling them UFOs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Very strange stuff. And another area that you tackle in the book is sort of the phenomenon, I guess you could say, of channeling, which I thought was really commendable, because a lot of people would just turn a blind eye to channeling and throw it all out. And one particular story that really blew me away was Dean Fagerstrom, J. Dean Fagerstrom, and his tale. So I guess talk a little bit about that, because it seemed like you put a lot of, I wouldn't say credence, but you certainly, thought that this was worthy of discussion, if you will.
Wow, is it? I'll tell you.
Yeah, it was pretty mind-blowing stuff.
When getting into channeling, yes, most UFO investigators will shy away from channeling. And personally, 90-something% of all the channelers that I investigated have proved to me that they were, just in contact with their own imaginations, or trying to get an audience, or, they're frustrated actors or something like that.
Yeah.
And or they're frustrated religious preachers trying to get an audience or a following. But when I was investigating the contact phenomenon, mm-hmm. and these are cases that, Alan Hynek and other people would not touch, I figured that, I'm just not going to look into cases where people claim to be abducted by aliens. I was going to explore the entire contact experience. That means people having manifestations, seeing what they call angels, all the way to spirits, all the way to ghosts, all the way to aliens, and so on and so on.
Yeah, contact with like anything almost.
Yes, anything that was otherworldly, that type of contact experience. And, of course, I became very frustrated. I mean, I could tell you really some comical adventures that I've had with some of these channelers. Mm-hmm. And but I believe channeling, it seems that some people are in contact with a higher intelligence or some type of intelligence, but it's very rare. For example, as you're talking about J. Dean Fagerstrom. Okay, I'll give you the basis of the basic information on this guy. He was a night watchman. So, the education was somewhat limited, and of course, he didn't have much of a technical background. And he originally wrote a letter to Dr. Hynek. And Dr. Hynek was so impressed with the letter that he contacted me and said, go and see this guy. So I went to go see him back it was 1982, and I mean, he lived in Brewster, New York at the time, and we were going, and he was talking about all of his contacts with a being called Dinestra, who would fit the Nordic type of being to, right to it. I mean, he would be the classic Nordic type of being. Mm-hmm. But Dean never had a UFO sighting, but he would have these contact experiences. And this is what we see with a lot of contact cases. In many of them, there are no initial UFO sightings. There are direct contact without a sighting. And the person has no interest in UFOs, doesn't read the UFO material, yet they have this experience. His encounters began when he was in Germany in the 1960s in the military, where he saw a manifestation of two beings on a board that he was working on doing some drawings of actually trying to figure out number patterns for the lottery. And these entities identified themselves, and they started talking. They were like holographic projections. And as time went on, they told him they would contact him again, and they did. So the next thing that happened was pretty bizarre. Dean didn't talk about some of the things that he was able to produce, that this Dinestra person, who he claims was originally from a planet called Solarian, and Dinestra actually passed over in 1645. He was he became an ascended being. So this was like an extraterrestrial who became an angel of some sort. I mean, very rare. So Dean took me down to his basement. He started talking. Well, this guy's smoking a cigarette and chugging a beer at the same time. Okay, so this is not some kind of mystical sort of person.
Right.
And all of a sudden he goes blank. And he's just standing there like he's in a trance. And I'm looking at him, and this guy is gone. Where the heck is going on here? I'm thinking to myself. Mm-hmm. And then after a couple of minutes, he snaps out of it, and he says, "He was here." I said, "Who was here?" And he said, "Dinestra." And he goes into a cabinet and he gives me this binder, and he said, "He instructed me to give this to you." And I opened it up, and there were these incredible drawings of technical devices in there that he did in the 60s. And I said, "What am I supposed to do with these?" He said, "In time, you're going to know what to do with these." Now, there's 32 diagrams plus about 20-something pages of an unknown language.
Yeah.
Now, these diagrams are just not things that are scribbled down. They're in vivid color. They're incredible. And the way they were done, he said one night, Dinestra told him that he was going to perform and do something and that things were going to happen. So one night while Dean is laying in bed, he claims that these little hooded entities came into the room and started placing something inside of his brain. And there was a device that appeared in front of him that vibrated his head. And the next day when he woke up from it, he had a headache. And he all of a sudden ran to a drafting store, and he knew exactly what to buy. He never had any art experience.
Yeah.
And he went back into a room and locked himself in the room. And a couple days later comes out with these 32 diagrams. And he said he would put the graph paper on the board, and a little blue light would appear, and he would connect the dots. And he knew exactly what color to shade it in. Now, when we looked at these diagrams, I mean, they're incredible, and they're symmetrical also. When we looked at them under a microscope, for example, the same distance in micrometers on each line of these cross-sections of these diagrams on the right-hand side is exactly the same on the left-hand side. A person couldn't do that. The only flaws that are in the diagram are with the flaws from the pencils that he used, the drafting pencils that he used. Mm-hmm. And they represent technical devices. There's devices there for cold fusion. There's a device there they call a photon accelerator. There's a device there for a three-dimensional viewing screen. And back then, of course, three-dimensional viewing screens were completely science fiction, but now they have them. And there's a device called, different devices doing different things. I mean, the diagrams went to a master draftsman to look at. The master draftsman said whoever did this had at least 20 years of drafting experience. Dean did not have that experience. Then they went to an engineer, and everything on there was electrically and accurate. And people would say, who did these things? And there were things in there, for example, in the coiling of different types of electrical components, the way coils were wound, which was something radically different that people looked at and said, this is a radical way of doing this. And one of the devices, by the way, was constructed, something called a helical coil. And it produced a current and an electromagnetic pulse that was several times stronger than anything that was available, but unfortunately, it burned out. Because, you see, in the diagrams, there's enough to whet your appetite and to intrigue you, but there's not enough information to thoroughly build these things.
Right.
So the diagrams went to Princeton University, they went to Northwestern University, they went to MIT, and everyone was amazed by them. And they said, we have to meet the person who did these. And of course, when I opened my big mouth and say how the diagrams were done, these scientists would just walk away and laugh.
Yeah.
Like, I can't get involved with that. But that's not the only thing that Dean did. He also produced about 15 pages of an unknown language, which was looked at by a number of linguistic people, indicating that it's a real language with over 200 characters. And over the years, I've slowly been able to translate them because he gave a number of pages which I call the Rosetta Stone. These symbols, by the way, are combinations of every language on Earth into one master language, which is bizarre because, people think that, the spoken language actually came from one central source on Earth from human beings and spread out and mutated and changed over the years. I mean, even today we could see language changing. For example, if you look at the way people wrote and talked back in the 1600s and compare it with the way people talk today and write today, it's almost like a different language, but it's still English.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
So, and it's interesting to know that according to legends, it's saying that the written language was given to us by angels or higher order beings to help the human race communicate. But in the language that he did are all different symbols from every language on Earth, and some of them are no longer used. Sumerian, Greek, certain Greek symbols are in there. Many different symbols from many different cultures are in there. And this is the key for interpreting it. Now, finally, this guy did 3 full manuscripts that have never been published. One is called The Celestial Citizen. One is called The Book of Solarian. And it's pretty far out stuff. And finally, in the 90s, I visited him, and he said now he's not doing diagrams anymore. He was doing a mathematical sequence. And he showed me all of these equations that he was doing. Now, at the time I looked at them, I didn't even understand them.
Yeah.
And I realized that, today what Dean was doing was chaos equations. And he was doing them not in a linear fashion, but writing them in an almost a dimensional fashion, a 3-dimensional way to solve equations. And he said, certain numbers are given to me, and I'm allowed to win the lottery. I said, what are you talking about? Now, Dean was a very poor guy, yet these communicators would allow him to win the lottery if they wanted him to get something.
Yeah.
So I went to the place where he bought most of his lottery tickets in Putnam Lake, New York, and I asked the fella about J. Dean Fagerstrom. The guy goes, yeah, he's weird. He wins more than anybody else. Now, the thing is that these guys, Dinestra, the Nestor group, I call them, they wanted Dean to start producing music. Of course, Dean could not afford a piano, an electric piano.
Yeah.
But he won the lottery to buy one with all of the recording equipment.
Yeah.
And when I went to see him in the 90s, he produced 100 tapes.
Wow.
And he claims that the composer, Franz Liszt, was now channeling through him, who's now an ascended being also, channeling through him, producing music. And he played me some of the tapes, and I said, well, Dean, that's pretty amazing. But, you know, some people would say just listening to the tapes that you could have copied it from somewhere else. You know, I'm trying to be the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
And I said, well, Dean, can you play something? And he said, I can't because I don't know when it's going to happen when they take over to allow me to play. That's why he said he has the recorder all hooked up on the piano, so when he gets that feeling, he could turn on the recorder, because everything after that is blank.
Yeah.
So, you know, of course, I'm trying to coax him to go at the piano, and I go over to the piano to make sure it's not one of those pianos which, you know, program in and, you know, make the thing. All of a sudden, he pushes me out of the way, puts on the recorder, and sits down and starts playing this amazing piece. And I couldn't believe it. You know, this is a guy who had no experience with music.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking 3 of the cassettes that he did. And he said it's all Franz Liszt. And you know, I don't know what Franz Liszt sounds like back then. So I went to a contact of mine. And of course, when you're involved with paranormal investigations and UFO investigations, you've got to work with a number of people as consultants. Mm-hmm. So there was a professor at the Juilliard School of Music in New York. And I called him up on the phone, and I said, I'm going to play you a tape. Can you tell me what style it is, or what style? And I play it for 5 seconds, and he goes, stop. He goes, it's Liszt, Franz Liszt. He said, the person playing it, he said, it's playing exactly like Franz Liszt did, and who's ever playing is a master piano player. So he said, he said, can you play more of this? I played about 5 minutes, and he said, stop. He said, it's definitely Franz Liszt, but what you're playing, and finally he heard all 3 tapes, and he said, these are pieces that have never been published that are definitely Liszt. So, you know, that kind of blew me away right there. And this indicated to me that perhaps, like J. Dean Fagerstrom, some people are in contact with something that is other than their own imaginations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
the guy produced so much stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, with channelers, you know, you go to them and you want to hear all this philosophical garbage. And when they start channeling, you know, all of a sudden they get this Indian accent or this, you know, accent and so on and so on. And I always joke and say, you know, what? You know, there's no one with a Brooklyn accent that has ascended to the other side that's channeling? I mean, give me a break. They all sound Indian. I mean, you know, they take on this mystical, yes, you must do this and do that. And in one particular case, for example, this channeler kept on talking about the Space Brothers. Mm-hmm. And the Space Brothers will come and save us, and the Space Brothers say this. And I raised my hand and I said, excuse me. I said, you may ask a question. Okay, fine. Aren't there any space sisters out there? I said, I would hate to think it's a male-dominated universe out there. But you see, this particular person who was channeling was a guy who was brought up in the 50s in a male-dominated society. Yeah. So the Space Brothers obviously have to rule outer space in his ideas.
Yeah. Yeah,
and another case, for example, you know, I go and see these channelers, and one of them said, oh, yes, we're going to be channeling devices that you can build so that you can talk to us and contact us directly. I said, well, that's great. I said, because, you know, this secondhand stuff is getting a little boring here. and they said, but it will take 6 months for you to come to these channeling sessions so that all the information can be given to you. And of course, you know, a lot of these channelers, for one session, they charge $100 a pop a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, 6 months, I said, why don't you just come down in one of your spaceships and drop it off, and I'll pick it up, and we could save ourselves a lot of time. I was never invited back.
Yeah. Well, it's an amazing story because as you point out here, and I just let you go with it because I love the story so much that I wanted to make sure people heard as much as possible. We should point out that the images, a few of the sketches are in the book, so people, if they want to get a view of this, they should definitely pick up the book because the sketches are amazing. And as you point out, this guy, he sounds like a pretty blue-collar guy, and he didn't have much money, but according to these different experts in different fields, he should have 20 years' experience as a draftsman and be a master pianist as well. I mean, come on, that doesn't add up in our reality, if you will. So,
and all of his diagrams, diagrams are scientifically accurate.
Yeah.
They were done, you know, by somebody with engineering backgrounds that are unbelievable. There are things there, for example, that are being speculated now and thought about now that are in those diagrams. And he held on to those diagrams from the 60s until I walked in his basement until he got the command or communication by this Dinestra to turn over these diagrams to me. First time I ever met him, out of the blue, he's just holding on to these things for years, and he gives them to me. And he says, they're yours now. I mean, that was pretty kind of, you know, blew me away right there, especially when I opened them up and I saw these amazing things.
Yeah.
Fagerstrom is probably one of only 3 channelers, contactees that have produced something that I would say is extraordinary. All the other ones, all the other channelers I've investigated is just pure and full of nonsense. And many of them talk over and over. They never answer your questions properly. They sound like lawyers in the courtroom with all kinds of spiritual rhetoric.
Yeah. I thought it was also interesting that you had a later sort of encounter, if you will, with Dinestra. You went to a different channeling session. That one sounded like there was definitely something going on. Because
well, you know what? And that blew the people away also. And I'll tell you, I can describe it kind of brief if you want.
Well, the point I was going to mention was that Dinestra warned you that you're the target of a very ancient evil force, which would kind of trouble me if I was in that position. How did you react to that whole thing? I guess you can't really react at all. What are you going to do? What are you going to do if you're the target of an ancient evil force, right?
Yeah, well, you know, there were people who contacted me who said they were in contact with 100 and something different aliens, extraterrestrials, and that they channeled through automatic writing. And I went to their house to see them, and of course not expecting much of anything. And they started channeling, and, you know, these extraterrestrials start coming through. And then all of a sudden the temperature of the room drops. I mean, it got so cold that everybody was looking at their breath. And people there were getting headaches. The dog that was there that was once friendly was now showing its teeth at me.
Yeah.
And every time I moved out of my chair, it would come over and sit at me and make like it was going to bite me. But it was very friendly when we came in. During that time, the phone kept on ringing. A pot flew off the stove and went up against the wall. There were knockings on the windows. And then all of a sudden, this person doing the automatic writing, their hands started vibrating back and forth. And then another message came on in a different writing saying, and another person was saying, "Who is this?" And it said, "I will speak only to Phil." And I said, "Who is this?" And it signed in Dinestra.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, these people, the Fagerstrom case was not publicized at the time. As a matter of fact, I had just left Fagerstrom a week ago and did the whole Dinestra thing. Didn't even talk about it with anybody. Wasn't published in any sort of thing. Yet this came through, which really surprised me. I mean, It took me by surprise. And, yes, there were all kinds of warnings and everything that and a lot of crazy things happened that night. And that was another case where a channeler produced something that made me think, and also there was a lot of manifestation of physical phenomena in the room that took place that particular evening. And think of it this way. Suppose these people were channeling, let's say, extraterrestrials out there in this federation of planets. Mm-hmm. According to what I understand, Dinestra, who's a higher order of being, couldn't get directly to the channeler. So Dinestra channeled through these extraterrestrials, sort of like a medium, used them as a medium, as a jumper to get down to the channeler so that he can get in. And because after Dinestra signed out, these other aliens, so-called aliens, came on and saying, "Who was that?" They're like talking with each other. We don't know who it is, and this communication has to end now.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty bizarre night.
Yeah. It's very strange. These are some of the stories in the book, folks, so go out and pick it up because it really blew my mind.
We gotta spread this stuff around. Let's put it on the internet.
You're listening to Banal of America Audio.
Great heavens! What kind of radio show is this?
Kudos to you for digging into these things, because, a lot of other people would just completely throw out the channeler stories and would have missed, this amazing Fagerstrom story. And this other one, too.
Yeah, well, this is true. But you see, once again, it's like, for example, astronomers who take pictures of the moon, let's say. Mm-hmm. And they say, and I look at the pictures and I say to these astronomers, I'm a member of an observatory here, and I say, wow, Bill, these images of the moon you took are amazing. They're so clear. I mean, they're like high resolution. And he goes, yeah, but you don't know how many shots I had to take in order to get these. Yeah. The same thing with channelers. You don't know how many channelers I had to go through and put up with all the crap before I got something that was real. And I believe the longer you delve into this, you go into this, sooner or later, as a paranormal investigator, if you're really out there in the field, if you're really doing it, not just, doing it for fun or a hobby or just seeing if you get your name in the paper or a reality show or something like that. If you're really out there with the cases, sooner or later, you're going to experience something and see that this stuff is all very real, and then it's going to become a reality to you, and that just may change your mind. I know, for example, many UFO paranormal investigators that have quit investigations because they experienced something, and it was no longer a fun thing to do on the weekend to get away from the wife or the family, mm-hmm. and let your imagination run away with you, a plaything, a hobby. It became a reality, and it scared them, and they got out of it.
Yeah, well, it can be very scary. Like I said, this ancient evil force would probably put me off for a while about.
Yeah, well, I mean, ancient evil force. I really don't know exactly what that means.
Yeah.
Maybe it was my ex-wife. I don't know. But yes, over the years, I think I've been fortunate enough, and it's almost like a coincidence that I've always been in the right place at the right time. I mean, probably my investigation of the paranormal would have been totally different had I not lived in the New York area when all of these sightings in the Hudson Valley took place back in the 80s. And that's what triggered me into the world of the paranormal back then. And like I said, as you read my books, you see how I'm putting all of these pieces together over the years. And then, of course, I get some critics that say, John Keel and Ivan Sandra, they said this a long time ago. This is true. John Keel was a very good friend of mine. But John did say a lot of this stuff a long time ago, but I'm the first one to actually put the case studies there and actually put the scientific information of theoretical physics into the idea of parallel universes. John Keel just said, they're from a parallel universe, but here in my books, Interdimensional Universe, and my new book coming out in December of 2011 called Portals, mm-hmm. really focuses in on the physics of how these other dimensions exist and how these other dimensions interact with ours, producing phenomena that we only get a fleeting glimpse of.
Yeah. Well, I've never really understood that attitude anyway in ufology and in the paranormal, where it's like, well, somebody already said that. Well, it's like, well, people are still performing Shakespeare. I mean, come on. So
it's true. People said, just because, we say, what are we doing about Jupiter? Galileo looked at Jupiter, back in 1620. What are we going there now with spacecraft for? But you see, Keel did say, about the idea of other dimensions and other universe where UFOs come from. But really, I'm the first one to put the theoretical idea of physics behind it and explain it all in detail. You have to remember, the UFO people, the people involved with UFO, not really the investigators, the armchair investigators, the one who read the books, all the books, and think they're an expert on it now. These people are probably the most critical. Out of all the paranormal fields, the people in UFOs are the most critical of all. John Keel said once that, Phil, why don't you just, cut out UFOs and just investigate the paranormal? He goes, the UFO phenomena, the people involved there are the lepers of the paranormal. You know that, don't you? I said, what? But it's been my luck and it's been my fortune to work with people like Keel, to work with people like J. Allen Hynek, to work with people like John Fuller, and other people who were actually pioneers in the field that build a foundation of what we have today. And unfortunately, we haven't built too much of that foundation in the last 15 years, but I believe we're on the verge of a new emergence of at least understanding the phenomena.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and I've kind of pointed that out on the program too over the past few years. It does seem like there's a trend moving toward a more multidisciplined approach and that sort of thing than it was when I first got into it. So it seems like people are turning in that direction because the lack of answers may be a big part of that. It's time to take a fresh look at all this and see if it connects in some way, as you're saying.
And also, you see, you have to remember also that people are doing this as sort of a hobby on the weekend.
Yeah.
They're doing it with practically, money from their own pockets. Mm-hmm. We would have never gone to the moon if we had to depend upon people who would work on the weekends in their spare time as sort of a hobby, financing the whole thing. And, somebody, when Dr. Hynek was on the Good Morning America one time, and he was staying at my place, and then we went down to the city, and he went on to Good Morning America. One of the persons said, well, you've been doing this for so many years. What have you found out? And he used to say the same thing. He used to say, you're depending upon people that practically are working on a shoestring budget, that are working in their spare time. And we would have never made the scientific discoveries we have today if we had to depend upon people, to work with that. But also, you see, there are many people in the UFO field who are like, it's very territorial, mm-hmm. and people do not cooperate. And the fact is that unless in the future someone produces like $100, $200, $300 million or something like that, and takes the best of the best and puts them together in a team to go out there and explore the paranormal, let's say for 5 years, and then at the end of that 5 years produce, a book, a paper on their findings, that they would be able to investigate all of these cases and practically have no expenses spared for equipment and traveling expenses and so on and so on. If this were to happen, then I believe we would be on the verge of understanding what all this means. But until that day takes place, with all of these loose, sort of like clans of UFO people running around doing their own thing, not cooperating with the other clans, the clans are different belief systems.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to happen.
Well, do you think that was sort of attempted by Bob Bigelow and the NIDS organization? Although that seems maybe that was less aimed at unlocking the paranormal than maybe owning the paranormal, a proprietary thing. If they could figure out what was going on, then they could, use it in industry or something like that.
Well, I don't think it was done to that extreme. I'm talking about, a big budget thing with hand-picked people from many different fields that are also, have some background in the UFO phenomena. Actually, Peter Gersten tried it one time, and he was going to put an organization together called Contact, and he actually flew in people from all over the place, and I was a member of that organization. So was Bud Hopkins and Peter Robbins. And it looked like, it was a dream come true, and then it just fell apart. And for why it fell apart, I'm still not sure today. But one day, Peter just got, I think, disillusioned by the whole Contact experience and decided that, it wasn't worth it. Some people claim in the group that they were approached by certain people who were from the government or men in black and told that the organization would never start and that they should not get involved with it. And some people did back out because of certain threats. I've never been threatened, except just before the publication of Night Siege, of course, as I make it clear, I was contacted by the Air Force, and I've been contacted by a number of government agencies, and I've been contacted, and of course, when I was investigating the sightings of the UFOs over the Indian Point nuclear reactor, I received quite a bit of friction from New York state government and federal government and military concerning, the information that I had about the encounters over there. Yeah, that was strange. I was the first civilian since 1969 to be directly officially contacted by the United States Air Force in regards to my UFO investigations.
Yeah, very strange stuff. Now, you mentioned in the book, and you also mentioned it when I was down there in Putnam Valley, you say in the book that there's rumors of a secret organization within the government attempting to capture an interdimensional entity to unlock the secret of travel between the dimensions. Can you extrapolate a little bit more on that? Because I found that really intriguing, and it may just be, nothing more than shadowy rumors, but I definitely like to hear more about it if you know any more about it.
Yeah, well, I've heard this before, and down in Pine Bush, New York, at one time there was a lot of activity down there, a lot of military presence. On one particular case that is really well documented, by the way, the military came in and they closed off almost an entire neighborhood and not allowing anybody in or out, went to the doors, knocked on people, and told everybody to stay in. And that people were looking out their windows and seeing jeeps coming down, helicopters coming in, and they were told it was just a training exercise. Obviously, they were looking for something, and my contacts tell me that, these dimensional beings have been merging in and out of dimensions in the United States military, and a secret group was brought in, and they're supported by the military to try to capture one of these beings to get the technology. Now, it doesn't stop there, because in my book coming out that I co-authored with Rosemary Ellen Guiley called The Vengeful Jinn.
Oh, yeah.
That's coming out in March. And I focus on my adventures or misadventures or whatever you want to call them in the Middle East. And to make a very long story short, I have a friend over there who I served with in the military who was a colonel in the Saudi security force for the royal family. Well, to make a long story short, I had dinner with one of the royal family members with all of these other people who were invited. And he just leaned over and said to me, "Why are you in my country?" And I said, "I'm researching the jinn." He goes, "The jinn?" He said, "My government has been trying to capture one of them. And the United States government and the European government, they come together in my country and they try to capture one."
Wow.
And I said, "Well, did they ever get one?" And they said, no. He said he didn't know because it would be security of the highest level. I said, "What did they want?" He said they wanted to get their technology. Now, when I was in Oman, I then picked up a story from a person who was a teacher who claimed they encountered one of these dimensional beings in the Hajar Mountains, where I was going to a place called the place of the jinn, the meeting place of the jinn, a big cave, Majas al-Jinn. And he said that he encountered a female of one of these species, a Janaya, and he got very terrified. And the Janaya sort of like saw him, looked at him, and then sensed something was wrong and sort of like ran to a distance and disappeared into like a portal. All of a sudden, he says, helicopters come over the hills in jeeps. And these military people picked him up, took him to a secret base, and debriefed him, asking him what they saw and everything. And it was obvious that they were trying to capture one of these jinn to see how they merge in and out of our dimension using a certain technology, perhaps. And this fellow was so scared to talk. He was more afraid of the military presence that picked him up than the idea of seeing this entity, this jinn. And this is like on two different parts of the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. I hear the same story about a secret organization, not only in the United States government, but that's made up of certain governments of the world, a special unit that is trying to capture one of these dimensional beings to obtain their technology. And I heard it on two different locations. When the cousin of the Prince of Saudi Arabia told me the story about how they're trying to capture, that just, shocked me right there.
Yeah, absolutely. The point you make here about them trying to capture the interdimensional entity for its technology also sort of highlights, in a sense, the short-sightedness that you hear when you hear these rumors about the government. It's always like they make a deal with the aliens to get their weapons and stuff. It's like, I find it troubling, I guess you could say, that if there is people within the government who are looking for this thing, looking to unlock the mystery of the paranormal, it's always, towards a military end or something like that. It's never, for the betterment of mankind. It's for how to destroy the part of mankind we don't like anymore or something like that. It's very unfortunate in a way.
Well, the military is always involved in stuff like that. It's the history of the United States. Mm-hmm. So, yes, I mean, but we also have to remember that, the dimensional beings, the jinn, may be part of it, and that there may also be other types of beings where the government has already made contact with. There was one particular case of a fellow in Connecticut, and when I went to go see him, he almost sounded crazy. And he talked about these entities appearing in front of him and talking to him, saying that he was, going to be part of some type of world-shattering event. But what really got me about this guy is that when I talked to him in 1980, mm-hmm. he said that they came and got him in his bed, and he said he was partially drugged. And he says he's pretty sure that the people who were taking him were human.
Yeah.
They took him out of his bedroom and they put him into a vehicle, and he said he was going in and out of consciousness, and he came to a road, a dirt road, with a sign that said, "Welcome to Southeast." Huh. Now, this guy lives in Milford, Connecticut. He had no idea there was even a town called Southeast. He said from there, he thinks he drove up a dirt road that had a gate in front of it and was taken into some underground establishment. And there he saw a laboratory with humans and your typical gray aliens. He was put into a room. All his clothes were taken off, and they came in and they rubbed something on him, some guys. And out of the other room, he said, came a female alien, which he proceeded to have sex with. And then, it sounds crazy.
Yeah.
But this was told to me in 1980. Then all of a sudden, I found the road that was a dirt road that's with a sign that said, "Welcome to Southeast."
Oh, wow.
And get this. In that area, there are underground iron ore mines that were being used by the government at one time in the past. Now, I didn't get into that area until the 1990s. But here, I had this case in the 80s, and I just filed the case away as being, part of the crazy stuff. Yet, Now, in the 1990s, it all starts coming together, and I get this information from this case, pull it out, and I said, oh, my gosh, this guy couldn't have known that there were these underground passageways in the Brewster southeast area that are old abandoned mines. And, of course, in the 1990s, I explored these underground passages and mines. And they're flooded now, and someone went through quite a bit of quite a bit of trouble to collapse some of the tunnels so you couldn't get into some particular areas. But this is what I mean. You get some of these cases and they sound crazy as hell, but then somewhere down the line you're doing research and this information seems to fill in gaps of what you're doing now. This fella, this verifies his story almost. There's no way that he could have even known the location of these mines. They were unknown for the last 100 years.
And you make the point, too, in the book that, you know, when you talk about the airplanes at Stewart Airport, you know, some of the stuff that the government says is shut down really isn't shut down. They just don't want you to know they're still using this stuff.
Well, that's true. You know, that was an old part of that Stewart Air Base was an old SAC field, Strategic Air Command, and they used to keep the B-52 bombers underground. So in that so-called abandoned area, which the runway was being kept really nice and everything was going on there, there's an underground establishment there. And, you know, I've followed a number of planes there at night. Well, the whole team did. I had a team of people. We're all in contact by radio. We saw these planes that were trying to emulate a UFO in the sky land in this field. They circled, they went down one at a time, and it was obvious that, you know, that they were military. Also, there was a lot of things going on at that field. And also at Stewart itself. You know, they have C-5A Galaxies coming in and landing there. And I did a Freedom of Information Act. I did an investigation. The United States Department of Agriculture was in there doing something top secret. And finally, recently, I put it together. And I was wondering why so many shipments of cattle were coming in on C-5As.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, what the hell's going on here? What are all these cattle? I have all these shipments, all these documents, cattle. But they would not. They would black out their final destination. Who is why is the military bringing in all of these cattle? Well, somebody told me, oh, the aliens are using it for blood and parts and stuff for cattle mutilation. No. I finally figured out where the cattle was going. It was going to Plum Island out in Long Island Sound, where they're doing research out there for developing viruses and stuff in cattle and livestock. That's a top secret island off the coast of Connecticut, where since the World War II, they've been doing secret research involving, you know, viral infections and bacterial infections. I'm sure you've heard of Plum Island.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
But those cattle were going there.
Interesting.
And, I mean, you know, that just opens up another book of worms, you know, another can of worms.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean,
wow.
But you see how all these pieces fit together when you're doing UFO investigation? You have to be like a detective. Just because you get something that's puzzling and it doesn't fit into place, that doesn't mean that, you know, it's not going to be useful in the near future when you get the other pieces of the puzzle so you can put the picture together. And this is what I slowly did. I put all the pieces together and, you know, got a pretty broad picture of what's going on. And who knows what's going on in Plum Island? Some people even think that, you know, they've got aliens out there as their guests.
Now, one part of the book that damn near knocked me out of my seat was this story here about a Major Andrews. Here's what you say. The caller identified himself as Major Andrews and said that he was calling from Burlington, Massachusetts, which, as luck would have it, is where I am calling you from tonight, Burlington, Massachusetts.
How about that?
I know, and it stunned me because we don't have any sort of military presence here. There's no base or anything like that. Was he calling from his home or his office, or can you shed some more light on that? Because, you know, that hits obviously very close to home for me. Okay,
well, it happened this way. I was preparing the manuscript for Night Siege.
Yeah.
And in the manuscript, I was going to talk about the encounters at the Indian Point nuclear reactor. One day, I get a letter from Washington, from the Pentagon, from a lieutenant colonel, saying that the Air Force was going to contact me in regards to my investigations into unidentified flying objects and the possibilities of violating areas of national security.
Yeah.
Really like it. Well, I didn't know how the contact was going to take place. Were they going to come to the door? Were they going to be men in black? I mean, all of these scenarios went into my head. This was in the 80s.
Yeah.
One day, the phone rings, and it's this major. Major Andrews. He's from, he's calling from Burlington, Massachusetts, and he was in an office.
Interesting. Okay.
And now remember, just because he identifies himself as major, that doesn't mean that he's actually in uniform.
Right. Right.
Okay. I assumed he was a uniformed, officer, a senior officer, and he started asking me all of these questions. And I really tried to get around it. For example, I tried to joke around with him, saying, yes, I was in the military, too. This guy didn't want to hear it. He had a job to do.
Mm-hmm.
It sounded like he was asking questions from a form that somebody else gave to him that he was supposed to get answers for.
Yeah.
So he was going through each question. And we were on the phone for 45 minutes.
Wow.
And finally he said that the United States Air Force is very concerned about the sightings in the Hudson Valley, and they don't want to start a UFO scare, and that they wanted me to send them whatever was going to be in that manuscript, which was only like half done at the time, to them so that they can check it out. And they said they really don't want me to put any encounters that involve the Indian Point reactor in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I don't know if I can do that or not. And he said, well, if you cooperate with us, we'll cooperate with you. And over the weeks to follow, this was very bizarre. I mean, the phone call was bizarre anyway. This guy was like, cold.
Yeah.
I mean, he was like, business, all business. There was no humor in his voice, nothing. And they sent me a package of documents, sort of like their cooperation, hoping that I'd send the manuscript in return.
Yeah.
Showing that they're cooperating with me. Now, most of the documents were blacked out, but there were documents in there that were from FAA, air traffic controllers, asking what to do about UFO sightings, and also from Coast Guard about unidentified lights under the water in Long Island Sound. Also, one of the strangest things that was in that packet, and it must have got to me by mistake, there was a letter in there from a woman in Tennessee who had a close encounter with a triangular object, pretty detailed. Now, it was the original letter. It had the original signature and pen from this woman, but it was addressed to Bob Pratt, who, was the co-author of Night Siege.
Yeah.
The letter was dated for 1976. I called up Bob, and I said, Bob, you're not going to believe this. I got a letter that's addressed to you. He says, I investigated those cases when I was working for the Enquirer. He said, Phil, I never got that letter. So this tells me that in some cases, yes, UFO stuff that involves a hot case that the government's interested in, they do intercept the mail.
Very interesting stuff. Yeah, I'll have to look more into this situation here, because this is a small town, too, so I don't understand, how this guy was in Burlington, Mass., but I don't know. It's very puzzling to me.
Well, it's puzzling also, that the letter came from Washington.
Yeah.
And that the phone call came from Burlington, Massachusetts. He may have been a field agent in the area.
That's possible, yeah. Yeah. Very strange.
So when we talk about, the Air Force and the military, not and by the way, this Major Andrews never identified himself as an Air Force officer. He said the Air Force was concerned that he was getting this information for the Air Force. So he identified himself with the major rank, but he could have been any branch of the military.
Yeah.
If I remember the phone call and the information correctly, I'm thinking, so, he could have been an Air Force major, but that not necessarily means he was. He could have been a member of the NSA or the CIA also.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With the same rank.
Interesting. Yeah. Now, given that you've been looking at this for like the last 30 years plus, obviously conclusions are hard to come by, but what do you think as far as, because this is always the tantalizing part that people seem to latch onto, what do you think the government really knows about what's going on here with all this stuff?
Well, I don't know if they know much. I think there's a very select group in the governments of the world that are privileged with information.
Mm-hmm.
If probably the majority of Congress is completely ignorant about the whole UFO situation.
Yeah.
There may be a few senior members who are privileged with top secret projects that are being conducted, like trying to capture a dimensional alien or stuff like that. But I'm sure there's involvement with the government, but they keep a low profile. And they probably know this organization, which I've actually touched on the fringes of it from time to time. It popped up in my investigations from time to time, and I mentioned them in some of my books. That's these people who I've encountered that have contacted me. So I think it's a very select group in the government, a secret organization within the government that really doesn't answer to really anyone, sort of like a black ops sort of thing.
Yeah.
And and I'm very familiar with black ops operations, and they don't answer to anybody.
Yeah.
And so I don't think there's a big government cover-up, but I do believe there is, secret work being done by a secret organization in the governments of the world.
Right. Well, it kind of ties in to something that Rich Dolan sort of put out in his last book, the National Security State, Volume 2, sort of like a breakaway civilization, if you will. There's a group maybe that, got a lot of this information, let's just say in the 40s or something like that. I mean, they were talking like 2 generations worth of people at this point. So it's like they're definitely separated from the rest of us in humanity, if you will, in some ways, by the sheer knowledge of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that the original people who got involved with UFOs was naval intelligence.
Yeah.
And that sort of like worked their way into these intelligence organizations that have probably branched out into one particular organization that answers to probably some of the major intelligence organizations. Who controls them. They're probably members of the military. They probably have absolute control over, like if they want to get an entire company of Marines out somewhere, all they have to do is make a phone call and they get it.
Yeah.
Just like what happened in Pine Bush. I believe the military presence was just a smokescreen to keep the people in, but the real team that was out there trying to do this and capture this guy, this thing, or whatever it is, you don't see them. One of the movies I like the most is the movie Predator. Have you ever seen like Predator 2?
Yeah.
With Gary Busey's a member. He's the chief of this elite team that's trying to capture the Predator.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was almost like, my gosh, this may be going on.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there are probably a handful of people like that that's on a team that travels all around, that has complete control over local police and the military, that have all this equipment that are trying to capture one of these dimensional aliens for technology.
And when you look at it from that perspective, it makes the whole idea of disclosure to be sort of a non-issue, if you will. I don't know if the government what could they disclose? I think that they don't really know, the people in the power to disclose don't know what's going on, as far as the president, people in Congress and stuff like that. And the people in the intelligence field, I don't know if they have the the wherewithal or the inclination to disclose this information, because it sounds like if they're still trying to capture one of these interdimensional things, they're still trying to catch up to what this is all about as well.
Well, that's true. And you're not going to have a disclosure when you have a very elite few that are holding the information. And these people aren't elected. These people, stay in that position for life. And when they finally retire or die, they groom someone to take their place.
Yeah.
So, they're very secret. They don't answer to anybody. Their budget is probably all black ops. And, they have, carte blanche and for everywhere around the world, and they're probably not only members of the United States, but as far as I understand, like I said, when I was in the Middle East, they're also members of this group from Saudi Arabia and from a number of the Arab countries and European countries. And it's an international sort of organization. It's not restricted to the United States, so there would be no disclosure because, one section may have to answer to the other. And it's not the United States government that's covering. It's this organization that's probably spread across the world.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So exactly. So it wouldn't be the choice of the president. He would be overruled by... these organizations.
But the president of the United States is like a CEO. I mean, he has an idea of what's going down in research down in the laboratories, but he has no idea how the scientists are doing it. And a lot of things the CEO doesn't even want to know, as long as he sees the money figures coming in. And he's like the public representative to the people and to the stockholders as to what's going on in the company. President is the same way. Very privileged, probably privileged to not that much information. It's an elected official, and you're dealing with people who are, like I said, who are in positions for life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. Now, obviously, there's a lot of talk about 2012 and all that stuff, and I mean, we don't necessarily need to go there, but it does seem like, as you say in the book, that these contact experiences are increasing. It seems like maybe there's for lack of a better term, there's a quickening going on towards something. I mean, what's the feeling that you get about all that?
The feeling I get is that's probably true. I think we're in an age where things are going to change radically in the way we perceive the universe. For example, these other dimensions, these other things may overlap periodically. It may be a cyclic type of event. Mm-hmm. Obviously, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, and so on, the idea of mythical creatures popped up, like gargoyles and gnomes and fairies and this and that.
Yeah.
Today, we look back at those stories and we think that they are just legends and so on. But to the people of that time, if you read some of the accounts and some of the truth and the fears, to them, they were all very real creatures. I mean, it wasn't a matter that they were legends. People were actually encountering these things. But we're doing it today. But it seems to be increasing. Perhaps there are periodic times in human history where these dimensions overlap, allowing phenomena from this other reality, this other dimension, to merge in with ours, and we start experiencing all of this phenomena. Maybe it's happening again. If this is true, in the next several years, our concept of what reality really is may start to change again, and we might start developing legends again that someday in the future may be looked at as, the crazy legends and stories of the people who lived in the 20th century and the 21st century.
Yeah. Well, as you were saying all that, I was thinking that, too, because it was like, maybe in 100 years from now, we still won't have any answers, but they'll look back and say, what we think the UFO phenomenon is now will have changed into something else, and they'll say, well, back in the turn of the 20th century, they thought it was UFOs. They called them UFOs, and they thought they were aliens, and now they're doing something completely different. So,
well, not only that, it's when people look at the paranormal today, because they don't understand, and UFOs, they start to attribute supernatural or religious significance to it.
Mm-hmm.
This is what people have done, human beings have done for centuries. When they encounter a phenomenon or something they don't understand, they can't explain it, they attribute it with a supernatural being or God. We're doing the same thing today with UFOs and other aspects of the paranormal. Perhaps someday in the future, we're going to understand all this. We're going to understand the nature of the multidimensional universe and look back at this time and say, gee, you know, they were all foolish people. They let their own fears, you know, make their decisions for them and so on. But you see, the way I can do, you know, alchemy and astrology was back in, you know, thousands of years ago, was a mixture of wide ideas and sort of like supernatural ideas and a lot of hocus-pocus stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But out of those things, a science was born.
Yeah.
Today, I think we're seeing the same thing. Someday in the future, we may understand the idea of the multidimensional universe, and a new science of the late 21st century or even the 22nd century may be born. And as far as 2012, you know, is concerned, and let me put it this way: if nothing happens, you know, on the winter solstice in 2012, I'm going to be awful disappointed. Because, I've been building this one up for a long time. I want to see something happen.
Yeah.
But there are concerns that, you know, there are things changing on this planet very quickly, and there are things changing which could have dire results for the human race. So I guess we'll just have to see. But then again, you know, if you look out through history, human beings have gone through periods of doomsday over and over and over again. But this is the first time that there are quite a few things that are scheduled for 2012 that I think are more than coincidence. One of the things that concerns me the most, and, you know, I do a lot of research up at MIT and so on.
Yeah.
One of the things that it's concerning the scientists up there is that the sun has been awful quiet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the sun balances itself out. We're supposed to be in a sunspot maximum right now. A sunspot is a very rare event on the sun. There's practically no activity. The sun has a tendency to catch up to itself.
Yeah.
So hopefully, you know, we're not going to see the sun all of a sudden expel, you know, 22 years of energy all in, you know, 1 week.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the sort of thing. The sun has a tendency to catch up, so it's going to become very active, no doubt. I mean, this is the way the laws of physics work in the cores of stars. Also, another thing happening in 2012 twice is Venus crossing the face of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, that's an interesting thing to be taking place in 2012 also. And the fact, you know, I don't know if you heard that the magnetic pole is shifting so fast that planes are having problems with their navigation systems.
Yeah, they had to shut down an airport to adjust the runway.
This is happening. This is also happening on a scale in the military also. And also the orbit of the Earth is wobbling more, and, you know, we're lining up with the giant black hole in the center of the galaxy. I mean, there are a lot of factors to consider that have never happened before in human history, which I find, you know, quite interesting and also a little disturbing.
Yeah.
So we shall see.
Yes, we'll be riding through the storm and see what happens, I guess, right?
Well, I hope it's something good. I mean, you know, I would like to see these dimensions merge into each other, and all of these guys come out of there. You know, all of these elves and creatures of mythical lore come out and say, look, people, we're really here. Boy, would that shake our reality.
Absolutely, yeah. I would be totally on board with that. So I'd be a big fan of that. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention here, I wanted to ask you about before I let you go, is on the back of the book, it says you've appeared on Oprah.
Well, that was before she was, you know, a big star.
Oh, okay.
It was back in 1983.
Okay, so she was first starting out almost, or back in, getting started.
Let's see, Bud was on also. Bud Hopkins, and they did one little segment of the Hudson Valley UFOs, and they showed the videotape of the Hudson Valley UFO. And, that was probably my big contribution in my experience with Oprah. The only time I really talked to her is when I was sitting down talking to her for about 5 minutes, but that's about it.
Oh, okay.
She was a nice person, but, this is before she became a superstar.
Yeah, before she
when
became
her show was out of Chicago, and it wasn't really, it was just starting to become nationwide.
Yeah. All right. Well, I figured I'd ask in case, She's
not interested in UFOs.
It seems that way, yeah. It seems like she's
But there are a lot of celebrities who are interested in UFOs that have talked to me regarding their UFO encounters. Well, one of them is Geraldo. I mean,
oh, wow.
he had a UFO encounter. I was on his show some years ago, and he told me privately of his encounter that he had.
Oh, wow.
Sighting.
Interesting.
So,
they're out
a lot
there.
of things going on out there. Oh, yeah. I mean, but, what's going to happen now is that there's so much dissension and so much problems in the UFO field right now. A lot of these people involved with UFO research, they say, well, the government's doing this to stop us and everything like that. I don't think so. UFO people involved with UFO investigation form these groups and these clans, and they give each other so much trouble. The government doesn't have to step in. They just screw it all up themselves.
Yeah, ufology is his own worst enemy. That's definitely the case. But between the turf wars and everything else.
That I'm a government plant.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the book. Yeah. Well, that's like the classic. That's the classic smear of any argument in ufology is, who's going to draw first on the government agent claim.
And, of course, this is, one of the reasons why I don't appear in very many UFO conferences, because the whole thing is it's just filled with a lot of paranoia, and there's a lot of arguing, and people aren't working together. And I think more or less, egos are on the line. And some people, I even think there's a point of jealousy also. Some people, if someone gets involved with a really good case, it seems that some other people get jealous and they try to put the case down and try to support the person to try to get the evidence out there and to help with the case. So, and also I think that there are also, in the paranormal in particular, there are just too many people out there who want their own reality show.
Yeah.
And some of these reality shows are ridiculous. For example, a number of them have contacted me asking me to come on the show or do segments with them. I turned them down because, the show, I told them on the line, the shows are actually absolutely ridiculous, and I won't have any part in it.
Yeah. Well, it seems like, especially with a lot of these shows, too, they want you to, they'll fly you in, but they're not going to pay you or anything like that. And then if you say no, then they're like, well, who can we get for free? I've heard stories from people who actually
said exactly like that. I mean, they want everything, and they don't want to contribute anything to the research being done, and they don't understand why some people will not. Oh, it's a big thrill to be on TV. I mean, give me a break. But yes, that's true. I mean, they want something for nothing, and they won't contribute to the research, and the people that they can get for free are people looking for publicity, so they, usually end up with some kind of screwed up program.
Yeah, exactly. They're getting like third-tier people because they can't, because the good researchers are, they know the score of the game, so.
Yeah, and many of these shows are scripted, and they're also the people involved are. I think they get them in casting calls.
Who's this?
They're not even. Some of the people involved in the shows are that they get them in casting calls. They're not even. They haven't even done anything in research.
Yeah, I've seen some shows where they have researchers on, and I've never even heard of them, and I've.
Oh yeah, they get them in casting calls. They look good, and they're young and everything, and it's actually pretty funny. But then again, Hollywood's going to do whatever it can to make a buck on what's ever popular.
That's true. Well, before we say goodbye here, what's coming up for you? You said The Vengeful Jinn is coming soon, and you got another book coming in December?
Yeah, in March, The Vengeful Djinn, which is a groundbreaking book, it's a dynamic book, is coming out. And then in December of 2011, portals, multidimensional portals. It's the origin of paranormal phenomena. That's coming out in December, and I'm working on a manuscript now that's due at the publisher, which will probably come out in 2012. It's called, right now, Files from the Edge 2, Haunted Places.
Oh, nice.
And that's on the horizon, plus a number of projects that I'm working on with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and research that I'm doing involving being able to detect and being able to monitor the idea of multidimensional portals in some way. So, still busy.
Absolutely, yeah. Sounds so like interdimensional portals, almost like these like window zone areas that we've heard about in the past.
Yeah, and in that book, I really get into the physics behind it and various equipment that I'm designing right now.
Oh, nice.
To help with the research and the investigation. So I believe those two books are going to be groundbreaking books, and we'll see, you know. But if 2012 is the end of the world, it doesn't really leave me much room for royalties, does it?
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens, I guess. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, yeah. Well, I look forward to it, and we'll you know, if you and Rosemary are interested, I'll definitely have you guys on, you know, later on this season to talk about the Djinn book, because, you know,
absolutely.
Oh, for sure, yeah, then, definitely, because I held back a little bit here on the Djinn discussion, because I know the book's coming soon, so there'll be a lot of information there in that, and also held back a little bit on this portal stuff, because I know you got the other book coming out. Both subjects are very interesting to me, so hopefully we can have you on in the future to talk about those, and your remarkable history in this field, because we just barely sort of scratched the surface a little bit on the sociological and historical aspect, and you've seen so much in the last 30 years that I would love to just talk to you about that kind of stuff as well. So, you know, this 2 hours have flown by, and I just loved it. I love talking to you. So,
you did a great job.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
The quickest 2 hours that I've ever done.
Wow, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, yeah, you know, I tried to make it as conversational as possible, and I think it turned out really well. So, you know, as I said in the introduction, you know, I like to think of you as an unsung legend in this field. You're not out for the glory. You're not out for, you know, the publicity and stuff. You're out to get to the bottom of this mystery. You're also daring enough to look at these outlier cases, which I think we need more people to do. And we need more people to, you know, put their finger in all the different paranormal pies so we can figure out who this chef is. And
that's right.
And that's what you're doing, and I really have a lot of respect for that, and look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Okay. Thanks.
So, that does it for this installment of BOA Audio Season 6. Big thanks to Phil Imbrogno for coming on the show and giving us so much extra time. You definitely want to check out his books, Night Siege, The Hudson Valley UFO Sightings, Files from the Edge, Interdimensional Universe, and his latest book, Ultra-Terrestrial Contact. You can find out more from Phil at his author's page at Llewellyn Books. Just punch in LLEWELLYN.com and then search for Phil Imbrogno, IMBROGNO. Check out his stuff, folks. I'm telling you, it will blow your mind. Moving right along, it's time for BOA Audio listener feedback, and it feels like it's been forever since I talked to you guys. So we're only going to do one email, and from there it will segue into two big issues I want to discuss with you all. The email comes from Ben in North Carolina, and here's what he has to say. I have enjoyed many of your interviews over the past few years. Thanks for all your time, effort, and expertise. Your style allows for guests to bring out much information and insight that they have in their field. I'm concerned that you're losing interest in providing this valuable service. Over the last 2 or 3 years, the available sites that provide this vital alternative viewpoint have decreased perilously close to zero. Your offerings have also decreased significantly in number. Sometimes it is weeks between new interviews. Please don't give up. Hosts such as Henrik Palmgren and Kevin Smith are finding new, interesting researchers to enlighten us. Thanks for your programming. Sincerely, Ben, in North Carolina. Well, first of all, thank you for writing in, Ben. I really appreciate your kind words about the program, and I also appreciate your concerns about the program. I'm also very sure that your concerns are echoed by the many, many BOA audio listeners, not just in America, but of course around the world. First and foremost, let me assure you all that I have certainly not lost interest in exploring the paranormal. I'm certainly not bored with the esoteric, my friends. The real problem here is simply a matter of time. As the folks who listen to our sister program, the Popcast Initiative, know, I picked up a little side gig over the holidays to make some extra money for the holiday season, and in turn ended up staying on at the job throughout January and onward here into February. And it seemed like things were going pretty good at first. We had a pretty good balance between BOA and this gig and my other gigs, but it all sort of came crashing down around mid-January and has really tightened up on me here over the last 2 or 3 weeks. I cannot tell you how frustrating and disappointing it is for me to be so late on getting these episodes out to you guys. Quite frankly, it's embarrassing, and I'm embarrassed that this show has gone so far off the rails here in Season 6. I kind of knew going into the year here that this was going to be a sort of bridge year for me, where we try to get things up and running on a number of big projects for the future, while also maintaining BOA's standard of excellence. But to be honest with you folks, I have let the ball drop in a big way, and I am well aware of this. It has been eating at me over the last couple of weeks, and it has been stressing me out beyond belief. So I have begun to sort of take steps to fix the situation. I don't want to get too deep into it, but the gist of it is that I'm looking for a new side gig that will be much more flexible schedule-wise and will allow me to really bring the focus back to BOA. This is an absolute must, my friends, because I'm not going anywhere, BOA is not going anywhere, and it's time to get back on track here with Banal of America. That said, I've learned over the years that when I make a promise to you guys that by the time it comes to fruition, it's quite mutated, especially when it comes to timeline stuff. So bear with me. That's all I'm asking you guys. Bear with us for another few weeks as we try to get this thing straightened out and as we try to get BOA back on track. I am certainly not losing interest in the world of the paranormal, and I am definitely not running into a lack of interesting researchers to talk with. In fact, right now I've got a slew of interviews in the can already taped with some fantastic researchers who are waiting for their episodes to be posted at Banal of America. So the programming continues, the show continues, do not worry. We're going through a little bit of a rough patch, but nobody knows that better than yours truly, the captain of the ship, and I am steering us towards some calmer waters. That is sort of, I guess you could say, the state of the program right now. We are aiming to get the next episode out to you in a week. Worst case scenario, it comes out to you in the next 10 days, and hopefully, moving forward, we can get this thing back on the right track. I sincerely apologize to all the people out there who may have had their faith questioned a little bit about this program. It's been 6 long years, my friends. BOA has established itself as one of the premier paranormal radio programs on the planet, and part of that is because we want to bring you the very best week in and week out. I could put together some real crap shows and bring in some real lousy guests for you just to say that we did an episode, but I don't want to do that. Each episode here in Season 6 is going to be the very best that I can do. But with that said, I also realize that you guys don't want to wait 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks, for a new episode. That is absolutely unacceptable for me, and it's absolutely unacceptable to you guys out there who have supported this program for so very long. So, once again, I want to apologize for the delay between episodes, and I want to assure you that BOA is not going anywhere. Now that I've bolstered your spirits, allow me to deflate the balloon a little bit here with some depressing but inevitable news. Without getting into the nitty-gritty legal details of it all, the gist of it is we can't use popular music anymore at the beginning of the program. And we are actively looking right now for a new theme song for the show. So, in a way, the bad leads to the good. If you're a musician out there listening and you want to contribute something, we'd love to be able to use your material as a BOA audio theme song. I'm also kind of leaning towards just a pure theme song for the program that we can use week in and week out at the beginning of the show. I had a feeling this was eventually going to bite us in the ass. I thought the program was sort of under the radar enough that it would not become an issue, and since the show is free, I really didn't see the harm in what we were doing, but there are a lot of legal issues involved in that sort of thing, and they just don't like people using popular music without compensation for the artists. And I totally understand that, and I can respect that, and as such, we'll be removing all popular music from the BOA Audio archive. Personally, I'm really disappointed by this turn of events, but at the same time, on the bright side, for the folks who are really getting frustrated with the delays between episodes, you'll be happy to know that eliminating the introductory musical mix for each episode will probably cut down a good 2 to 3 hours of production time for the show, and given the way things have been so tight for us here in Season 6, that is probably for the best. Apologies to Phil and Brogno, who kind of got caught up in the storm here and didn't even get any music as an intro for the program this week, but we sort of found out the news about this popular music issue right around production time on the episode and had to scramble to figure out what we were going to do for this particular show. Nonetheless, summing it all up, BOA Audio still going strong. We're cognizant of the issues facing the program right now and are working diligently behind the scenes to make things run smoother, and we're in the market for a new BOA Audio theme song, particularly something that we could use week in and week out. That does it for the listener feedback portion of the show. I really wanted just to talk to all you guys out there here this week because I know it's been a while since you heard from me. I've gotten a lot of concerned emails from folks who are not just concerned about the program, but about me in general. I'm doing fine, folks, just very tired, very worn out, and just worked to the bone over the last few weeks, and am frustrated with the way things are going here at BOA HQ. But from that frustration, I'm confident that we will emerge stronger and better and sleeker than ever. If you want to get in touch with me, there are a number of ways to do it. You can write to boaaudio@hotmail.com or go to binnallofamerica.com, BINNALL of America.com, and click the contact button. And the final method, of course, is to join up at the official BOA forum, theusofe.com, theusofe.com. Awesome group of folks there talking about the paranormal and the world of pop culture as well. Join up and join in on the discussions at theusofe.com. Beyond that, I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, so befriend me or poke me or follow me. It's all good, and I'd love to be in touch with you via those social networks. Provided that things go a little smoother next week, and how could they not at this point, we will bring back BOA Audio listener feedback with a whole bunch of new emails from the outrageous and awesome BOA Audio listeners. Up next, it is the thanks portion of the program. Allow me to tip my cap and give thanks to the amazing and esteemed BOA staff: Leslie, Chiron, Regan Lee, Joe V, Tina Senna, Rochelle Hawks, Marla Pena, our contributing cartoonist Andy Carolin, and our webmaster Jeremy Boston. I also want to welcome our newest columnist who will be debuting this coming week, Bruce Priddy, with the Paranormal Apostate. So stay tuned to BOA for that. The BOA staff has contributed a whole bunch of new columns since the last time you heard me, including the return of Marla Pena with a recap of her 2010, Leslie's examination of the Dead Friends on Facebook phenomenon, Rochelle Hawks' look at the meme that was the change in the zodiac that went around at the end of January, and Regan Lee's recounting of her conversation with her mother regarding Mothman. And I've got a whole bunch of other stuff from the BOA staff in my to-do column, so we're going to get a whole bunch of new stuff posted from them over the next few days and weeks as well. And, of course, once again, stay tuned to BOA for the debut of The Paranormal Apostate by Bruce Priddy, as well as a couple of other new columns due to appear at BOA in the next few weeks. We say it at the end of every episode, but it bears repeating once again, my friends. If you're only listening to BOA audio and you're not reading the columns at Banal of America, then you're only getting half the story. BOA, make it a part of your everyday search for esoteric news and opinion. Given the ridiculous delay between episodes here of BOA audio, I would really not feel comfortable asking for folks to make a donation to BOA, so I will hit you up for donations next episode, provided that I feel a little less guilty about how long it takes us to produce the program for you all. And finally, let's take a look at what's coming up for you on the next installment of BOA Audio. We're going to be welcoming back our old friend Dr. Bob Curran, direct from Northern Ireland, to talk about his new book, Man-Made Monsters, talking about the inspirations for the Frankenstein story. There were a lot of real-world situations that lent themselves to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. We'll also talk about the Golem. We'll discuss alchemy. We'll hear about ancient computers and robots. We'll also cover the Voynich manuscript and Dr. Bob Curran's previous book, Dark Fairies. It's an interesting mix of myth, legend, history, and gothic horror in a lot of ways. A lot of really cool and interesting stuff there in the episode from Dr. Bob Curran. He is a master storyteller and really unleashes some remarkable information for us about not just man-made monsters, but what these man-made monsters say about the men who make them. That's next week on BOA Audio. Dr. Bob Curran talking about man-made monsters. And on that note, we close the book on another edition of BOA Audio Season 6. Big thanks once again to Phil Imbrogno for coming on the show. Big thanks to Ben in North Carolina for writing in for BOA Audio listener feedback. And, of course, super huge thanks to all you folks out there, the hardcore BOA Audio listeners, the folks who have been waiting patiently to hear from me once again. I really appreciate your support in a huge, huge way. Without you guys, we would simply be nothing at all. So allow me to humbly thank you once again for making BOA Audio a part of your esoteric audio playlist. Until next time, this is Tim Banal, thanking you for listening and signing off.